Welcome, everyone. Thank you to Food Rescue US. It's great to see so many familiar faces in today's Connect and Learn. My name is Sky Cornell. I am the director of our consulting projects at Social Venture Partners Connecticut. And again, we're very happy to welcome Carol Shattuck, the CEO of Food Rescue US, and Melissa Spiesman, the Chief Operating Officer of Food Rescue US. We're eager to hear from them. This is a very important time to be having this conversation in Connecticut, but it's also wonderful to be able to have the perspective that you can bring from the work that you're doing nationally. So I will get started with the bios, and then we will move you quickly into hearing from Carol and Melissa. So Carol Shattuck, as I said, is the CEO of Food Rescue US. Previously was with AmeriCares for 13 years in senior leadership positions. And also in 2015, joined Military Adaptive Sports, which planned and executed the 2016 Orlando Invictus Games, and then came to Food Rescue US soon after. And in 2018, became the CEO of the organization. Welcome again, Carol. And Melissa has a background in hospitality and integrative nutrition, joined Food Rescue US in 2013, and has become the grown to become the COO of the organization. So as I understand it, Carol will be sharing about broadly the 30,000-foot view, and then Melissa will narrow in our focus onto Connecticut. Please ask questions throughout, and there will be time to ask questions at the end. This is a great size group to be really in a discussion, so we're looking forward to that. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Carol.
Thanks so much, Sky. And thank you so much for the invitation to present to SVP Connecticut. I've attended a couple of your past presentations and learned a lot. And so that's our intent today, is to share, as Sky said, I'm going to give kind of the 30,000-foot story. And this is a Connecticut story. We were founded in Connecticut, and then Melissa will go a little deeper into what's going on in Connecticut. But I see Bruce Coe here, and I just want to give a shout out to Bruce. He sits on our board and has for a number of years. He, quite frankly, could be giving this presentation, but and if Linda's here, we say hello to her too. So Sky, you might go to the first slide, please. Thank you. So I want to tell a little bit of how we were founded, why we were founded. And I think it's a really great story when you think about entrepreneurs. So there were two individuals, Kevin Mullins and Jeff Shocker, who were friends. They lived in Connecticut. I think they lived in New Canaan. And Kevin is a pastor. Jeff is a software developer. And they both had experience in, they both were well aware of food insecurity. But Jeff in particular, when he was a struggling actor in New York, had worked in a number of restaurants, and he saw all the food waste. So they came together and they said, there has to be a solution, because on the one hand, there's so much food waste happening, and yet there's so many people who are food insecure. So they put their good minds together and came up with a solution that really started with technology. They said, let's create an app that connects food donors who have excess food and link them to social service agencies that are feeding the food insecure. And let's use volunteers to be the transportation. So when you put all of that together, you come up basically with our model that started in 2011 in Norwalk, quickly grew around the state, around Fairfield County, and then, as Melissa will talk about, around the country. But they were really looking for a solution that, as I said, used an app and called on volunteers. But the other focus was always about healthy food, with a great recognition that the fact is that a lot of people who are food insecure just don't have access to fruits, vegetables, fresh meat, dairy. It's much harder to get their hands on that or to afford it. And it's so critical for people's health, and especially for children in their early developmental years. So the other really key part of our model is that we do direct transfer. So our rescuers, our volunteer food rescuers, go to the food donor. It could be a grocery store, it could be a restaurant, and could be a stadium, could be corporate dining. And they pick up the food, and then in their car, they take it directly to the social service agency. So we call, obviously, direct transfer. So the fact of the matter is we don't have trucks, we don't have warehouses. So when we talk a little bit more about our model, when I talk about it a little bit later and what makes us so very efficient, that's a key part of it. So why don't we go to the next slide, Sky, please. So as I said, we're very much a dual mission organization. It's to end food waste and to help end food insecurity. So I often will say, basically, we're taking a bad, which is food waste, which we'll talk about that in a minute, and doing good with it, feeding the food insecure. So the food waste crisis, and the other thing I will say, probably and I wasn't here, Melissa was here in the earlier days. In the early days, I think there was, when we were called community plates, there was much more conversation about food insecurity and probably less about food waste. But as we all know, there's so much attention now on global warming and the impact of so many different inputs that are helping that happen. And it turns out that food waste is a major contributor to creating methane gas, carbon dioxide, both which contribute to climate change. So food waste can be any number of things. The excess food that we're talking about, imperfect produce at farms, unused food at large scale events. And quite frankly, we're going after all of that. And according to Project Drawdown, and I don't know if any of you have ever read about them, but they are really an excellent research organization that's looking at the impacts on global change, on global warming. And food waste is one of the key. It contributes about 8% of global emissions. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Sky, if you could move, please, to the next slide. So here's just some high level numbers. In 2019, the millions of tons of food waste that was generated, CO2 that was released, and just an interesting visual to think about, 24+ million Olympic pools worth of water was wasted. So it's not just the food waste, it's all the energy that goes in to manufacturing, or to growing, manufacturing, transporting, distributing this food that then gets wasted. So it's waste all over the place. Sky, if you could move to the next one, please. So then the hunger crisis in America. Right now, the estimate is that almost 34 million Americans live in food insecure households. And that means that they do not have regular access to healthy food for themselves or their families. And as everybody knows, if you live with hunger or malnutrition, it leads to a lot of chronic physical, mental illnesses and impacts productivity in schools and the workplace. And as I said earlier, with kids in particular in their early development years, if they're not getting healthy food, that's going to have long-term effects on them. Sky, if you'd move on, please. So hunger in the US, about 1 in 6 children are living with hunger. It creates a tremendous amount of additional healthcare costs with all the diseases that go along with that. And there are about 24 million people who live in food deserts. That means that they don't have ready access to food from a nearby grocer, and certainly not an affordable one. So I'm sure we can all sit here and agree that having so many people food insecure in America is really unacceptable. It's also a global issue, but today we're talking about America. Sky, please. So I already talked a little bit about how our model works. So the food rescuers pick up the excess food, and it comes from all kinds of different places. And the receiving agencies, excuse me, can be community kitchens, shelters, pantries, family centers. Melissa's going to talk a little bit more about the landscape in Connecticut, so you'll hear a little bit more about that. but we're able to go really deep into the community. We have tremendous resources. We have a tremendous network of people who are doing this work. And for instance, during the pandemic, it was as the food insecurity numbers really spiked, it was kind of shocking to us, but in some ways gratifying, because we kept hearing about more like a small pantry in a church in Bridgeport, or a small food pantry that wasn't receiving food from, other avenues to receive donated food. And so we were able to get deep into the community and help those people and establish new relationships. So Sky, you might move on, please. So this is a slide that just shows you some of the food donors that we have, and they're far more than this, but I'll give a shout out to Trader Joe's. We have a really excellent relationship with Trader Joe's. They have what they call the Shares program. Melissa and I, some years ago, were in California and met with, which is where they're headquartered. But Trader Joe's is an example of a grocery store that really plans for donations. We probably pick up, some of our sites pick up literally every day, sometimes twice a day from them, as they turn their store and always have fresh food for everybody. But we're also doing a lot more with farmers markets, farms, especially in Connecticut, hotels. So that just gives you an idea of the variety. And we're always adding new food donors. Sky, you might move the slide, please. And then this just gives you an idea of, we're now, I believe it's 42 locations in 24 states in the District of Columbia. And the story here is, so here's this idea that two gentlemen had in Connecticut, in Fairfield County in 2011. And over the years, people started to hear about, then it was called Community Plates. We rebranded in 2017 as we started to add new locations. But people would hear about us and call and say, gosh, that sounds like a really good idea. Could I start something? So we heard from individuals, but we also heard from other 501c3 nonprofits that were working in the food space, who said, this sounds really great. We already do something in the space, or we're interested in doing something in this space, but we don't have an app. So the app became really a big calling card for us, basically. And we'll talk about this, and Melissa, who's had her hands and feet in our app development world for many years, can talk much more about it. But we've just about a year ago launched the third generation of our app. We've made tremendous investments in it, and we share that with other 501c3 organizations, and we basically license it to them for a very, very small fee. So that's kind of where we are around the country, and we're talking to people all the time who want to join our network. Sky, you might move it, please. So the app, which I talked about, and I always say this, and it's so obvious, but there is no way. So last year, 2022, our network completed over 91,000 rescues. So, which I was just, that was a huge uptick from 2021. And so, and I think in Connecticut, they did just over 12,000 rescues. They do about between 33 to 40 rescues a day. We never take a holiday, 365 days a year. So it goes without saying, there is no way we could manage these rescues without an app. You can't do it with Excel sheets. You can't do it with telephone. So it is critically important to us, and it's why it's our number 2 line item on our budget. And we have offshore developers who help us on a daily basis, as well as our national team. And as I said, Melissa can talk more about that, and she can talk how it works. Okay, Sky, thank you. So just a little bit about our impact. And when we meet, for instance, with our board, we have a board meeting tomorrow. We really talk a lot about what's our impact and how do we grow our impact. Because when you work with a mission like ours is, you want to make sure that you're reaching more and more people, because the needs are so great. So our latest numbers, these are cumulative numbers, 112 plus million meals provided to those in need. And then there is a conversion rate. We've kept millions of pounds out of landfill and a lot of CO2. Sky, you can move that. So I just want to talk a little bit about, reiterate what makes us unique. So, and there are a lot of people who are working, thankfully, in food recovery and helping to feed the food insecure. And that's a good thing. What makes us unique, I believe, is our web-based app, which makes our model adaptable and scalable. We use volunteers, and the direct transfer model obviously is critically important. So we're not wasting food. Food's not going into a warehouse, especially fresh food, where it could deteriorate and then end up having to be thrown out. So Sky, you might go to the next slide, please. And then a few other things. We're highly efficient because of our gift in kind model. And I don't know, because of my days at AmeriCares, which was also a gift in kind organization, they were, in their case, they receive pharmaceuticals and medical supplies, but ours is obviously food. But it allows us to be incredibly efficient. So we have the draft of our 990, and just to give you an example, in 2022, the value of the food that was donated to us was at $62 million. And so if someone looks at our 990 and they'll go, wow, well, that's a big number. Our cash number is a fraction of that, and a small fraction of that. And so we are able to take every dollar that somebody gives to us and turn it into 18 meals. So it's a leverage that we're proud of, and it's an efficiency that we're proud of. There's some days when I'm talking to the board where I think, we might be a little lean, but we're gradually adding to our national team. We've gradually added over the years, but the efficiency is really a highlight. And then the fresh, healthy food is just so critically important to so many people. Our ability to go deep into communities. And then as we talk to the businesses, and this has been one of the really interesting things over the last couple of years, because more and more people have become aware of the importance of reducing food waste. And Project Drawdown, which I mentioned earlier, they've just come out with a statement that to keep end of century warming to 2 degrees Celsius, 2 degrees, food waste elimination is the #1 solution, which is, when we read that, we were, I have to say, a bit shocked. Now, they do have a more aggressive scenario where if you're going to limit warming to 1.5 Celsius, food waste comes in for eliminating food waste after wind, solar, and a plant-rich diet. But so we've found that businesses, we're talking to more and more businesses that are being very aggressive and proactive about zero waste. One of the largest grocers, national grocers in the country, who we've gotten to know well and talk to fairly frequently, they have one of the most aggressive efforts to reduce their waste through all their stores. It's going to take a while, but they understand the importance of doing that and doing good with it, and also helping to feed the food insecure. So yes.
Can I we had a question come in that I just want to find out. And it's related to, so it's from Wendy Foster. And Wendy, do you want to just come off on chat so we can have a conversation? Because I think this is a really, an important question.
Super.
Carol and Melissa, my question was, do the food donors receive a tax credit, a donation credit for what they are providing, and how is that calculated for them?
Okay, that's a very good question, and I'll answer first, and then Melissa, you can jump in if I leave something out. But yes, if they want to take get a food donation credit on their tax, they certainly may do that, and we're able to provide them with the value of the food that they've donated. And there are all kinds of calculations that are used, but yes. And then some of them some of the larger grocery chains actually scan all the food as it goes out their door into the hands of our volunteers. So they use that. And Melissa, what have I left out?
Yeah, so the only thing I would add to that is because every state has their own guidelines around this, and obviously then at the national level as well. The food donors, in some cases, it's based on the size of their business as to which tax credits they can take. And some it's that's state regulated, right? So in some cases there are, you have to have annual sales of X, or you have to produce X number of pounds of tonnage that has to be hauled. But one of the things that we do know specifically about credits is that our food donors experience a huge reduction in their waste hauling costs because they're able to donate it. And when you just say that, you're not really thinking about it, like, well, how much money does it cost to take away garbage? But it takes a lot. And, and then they also feel really good about doing that kind of work. Great question.
Yes, for sure. So Sky, if you just go to the last slide, which basically is one of my mantras, it just doesn't make any sense to waste perfectly good food and harm our planet when so many people do not have enough food. It just, it doesn't make sense. And we believe that we know that we have a simple but highly effective solution. And I think that's why our two founders who had this really good idea sitting in Norwalk, Connecticut, why we've been able to have so many people reach out to us to ask to become part of our network. So that's what I have. I'm happy to answer any other questions, but we can also save them to the end. And then Melissa's going to talk more about Connecticut and what other things. The app, we should talk about technology a little bit too. Oh, Wendy has a question. I can't read the whole question.
Wendy, feel free to go ahead.
Thank you. I'm sorry to ask another question. I don't want to.
No problem.
I'm curious how you handle perishable foods or foods that need refrigeration, like milk or meat.
So basically, go ahead. There you go, Melissa. I've talked enough.
You sure?
Yeah,
okay.
Very
so
sure.
Since the very beginning, we've used this principle that we so cutely named grocery to home principle, where we're not moving food. Our food is not moved any more than 15 to 20 minutes for most of our rescues, basically exactly the same way you'd put a quart of ice cream, frozen ice cream in your car, bring it home, it would go right into refrigeration. So we're picking it up, it's being held in refrigerated temperatures at the food donor, and then we're delivering it right to the agencies where they're either giving it directly to the end recipients or then they're refrigerating it. So, and then I'm just going to take off on that point. So, after all of the information that Carol has shared about the problem around food waste, both the impacts on food insecurity and on the planet, we kind of think like, so why wouldn't more food donors want to do this? Why wouldn't they see the benefits to this type of work? And unfortunately, a lot of them don't even realize that there are liability protections in place. One of their biggest obstacles is, well, I don't want to be liable for donating this food, and if something should happen to somebody. But there are liability protections in place. 1996, Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act was signed into law where any business donating food in good faith is cannot be brought up for liability for anything that should happen to anybody by donating their food or eating the donated food. And in all the years it's been in practice, it's never been challenged. So, and that's really more about education and having food donors understand that there's no liability challenges involved in donating food. We also try to make it really easy for food donors to donate their food. We don't want to get in the middle of their workflow. We want to make sure that we're being really respectful of their business practices. Anybody else have questions before I move on? Okay, thank you.
I think there is one.
Oops.
Yeah, hi.
I can't see. Hi.
Hi, it's Gary. Do you have any sense of what percentage of the leftover food that you're getting to, or either, I don't know if there's any way to measure that, or if you have any instinctive feel for how much you're actually getting?
Of all of the wasted food?
Yeah.
So that's interesting. So no, I don't think we do, because I think it goes really back to nobody's really measuring. You think about all the streams for food waste, right? So it's happening at the farm level, it's happening at distribution, it's happening at shipping, it's happening at the retail level, it's happening at the home level. So I don't know that it's being measured and reported along the way to really be able to say how much of that, of all the food that's being wasted, we're actually capturing. So I'm just trying to think a little bit more about what we have. So I know that in Connecticut, 40% of all the 40% of all of our waste is being shipped out of state and being added to landfill, and 24% of that waste is actually food. But other than that, I don't have that other information.
I guess I'd ask it this way. Do you have a sense that there's an opportunity to get more?
Oh, yes, always. And that was what Carol was talking about with impact. So we can grow our impact not only by expanding the number of locations that we serve, but in our existing locations, there's always more need. And we know that there's always more food waste. And it was what Carol was pointing out before about, and we always knew this, but it really came to light during the pandemic, the amount of need that the amount of services provided to people in need that we don't know about. So there are small agencies, little, whether it's in houses of worship, whether it's just community centers that pop up, that people don't even recognize are really doing so much of the work providing food to people in need. So yes, I think there's definitely a lot more that can be done, and a lot more food going into the waste stream. Carol?
And the only thing I would say to that, and I think it's, we also hear that we waste 40% of our food supply, which I think I said earlier. But I go back to the good news is there's so much more awareness now of the impact of food waste on our environment, that we're hearing from more and more people, especially corporations who are really getting on board. And in some of our locations, they've been partnering with like stadiums and doing really massive. We did, our Miami site did the Super Bowl in 2020, and they retrieved something like, I think it was 40,000 pounds of food. And then they did a Formula One 3-day weekend thing last year, and that's about to happen again. It was like 90,000 pounds. So there is a question, an interesting question about why is there so much food waste when people are preparing, and grocery stores, they can't run out of, good, healthy produce for their customers. And if you are in a stadium, you can't run out of food there either. So, but I think the good news for me is that there's so much more awareness and people are talking about it.
I think that's a really interesting question. I know I have a question I'd like to add on to that. I'm going to maybe speak about it a little and then put a pin in it, because I know we'll want to focus on the Connecticut. We'll want to bring the Connecticut focus that Melissa is going to speak to. I'm sure that'll be a lot of interest. But I am curious about the broader conversations about preventing, right? Because you're never going to fully prevent, but
Right.
Are there steps that you're seeing organizations perhaps that you've been partnering with for a while take on prevention? So Melissa, I don't know if that's something you could speak to briefly, or if you'd rather dive into Connecticut and save
Yeah,
that again.
no, I can certainly speak to that really briefly. So what's been happening with the awareness around all of the food waste? So a lot of education's been happening around what we can be doing at home, right? So really thinking about all of the food that's being wasted at home. But you can't manage something if you're not measuring it, right? Like there's always that old saying about that. And there are a lot of technologies being developed now where either at the restaurant level, the food service level, even at the grocery store level, people are able to manage the measure the food that's being wasted and then be able to adjust their purchasing and then really understand where they can be making those changes. And then that kind of ties into something else that I was going to talk about in Connecticut, but there's also this idea around culturally appropriate foods. So if you're in a supermarket, if you're in a farmer's market, if you're in a restaurant and you're serving food that your community, or you're selling food that your community is not used to eating, well, no matter what's going on, they're not going to be purchasing that food. And so that food will end up going to waste also. So it's really a matter of understanding communities and what communities need and being able to service that as businesses grow and expand and start looking at their food waste.
The only thing I might add is we've found that with restaurants, because many restaurants they may be one restaurant, they may have 3 or 5, but their bottom line is so impacted by food if they're throwing it out, and they are really sensitive to that. So we do have good relationships with a number of restaurants throughout our network, but the really large scale donations aren't coming from restaurants. So I think because they're so aware, and I think, as Melissa said, consumers are getting so much more aware of their waste in their household. They may be composting, they may be buying less, they may be buying, not buying as much, or they have a freezer, so they're looking out longer term.
No, thank you. Thank you for addressing that.
No problem. So now I'm going to just focus a little bit more on specifically on Connecticut and our work in Connecticut and the information we have about food insecurity in Connecticut. As Carol was describing it, food insecurity is really a very complex problem. It's closely related to poverty, but not all people who suffer from food insecurity or who are food insecure live below the poverty level, and not all people who live below the poverty level are even raising their hands and saying that they're food insecure. So a lot of factors go into how we're measuring food insecurity, how we're reporting food insecurity, and then how we're trying to meet the need of food insecurity. The percentage of adults in Connecticut that say they don't have enough money to buy food has nearly doubled during the past year. So what we saw was a slight decline before the pandemic in food insecurity rates, and there was national adjustments being made. But then the pandemic hit, and obviously, everybody's livelihood was impacted in some way. Everybody's access to, whether it was childcare, whether it was things happening in your job, whether there were so many people who were laid off. So the rate of food insecurity has risen greatly over the last, say, 5 years. And in 7 years ago, there was a 10% food insecurity rate in Connecticut, and that has now jumped to 17% throughout Connecticut. And those trends that we're seeing in Connecticut are being mirrored across the US. So it's scary to think that with the knowledge that we all have about food insecurity, about the impact of food waste on the planet, that those numbers are still growing. We're also seeing large differences of food insecurity rates in Connecticut, being the factors of race and gender, age, income, disabilities, and other factors are greatly impacted across Connecticut. 11% of white people, 25% of Black individuals, 34% of Latino adults reported food insecurity in the past year, 13% amongst men, 20% amongst women, 14% amongst adults living without children. And the scariest one for me always is 23% amongst adults living with children. More than a quarter of the people, young adults reporting between the ages of 18 to 34 reported that they were food insecure. So, you know, we look around Connecticut and we know that it's such a diverse state, but what we also have to realize is that food insecurity impacts everyone. Someone was telling us a story just 2 weeks ago. They live in Connecticut and they didn't even realize somebody living right next door to them, same size house as them, see them at the grocery store, that person, because of their limited income, although they were able to pay their mortgage month to month, sometimes they were unsure if they were able to buy enough food to feed their families, to support a healthy lifestyle. So something that we should really all be thinking about is it's not just what we would imagine in an impoverished area, but it's happening in all of our communities. We're also looking at food waste around Connecticut, and ReFed is a food waste think tank, and they reported in 2019, 653,000 tons of surplus food were generated in waste throughout Connecticut. It's a huge amount of food just in our tiny little state. 40% of Connecticut's food waste is being shipped out of state, like I said, and 24% of that waste is food. It's a huge amount of food. And again, it's happening at the farm, it's happening in distribution, and it's certainly happening in each of our homes. With inflation and rising food prices, people are having greater difficulty in purchasing food, in getting to markets, and getting healthy, appropriate foods for themselves, especially in our under-resourced communities. So we really have to take a look at how we can better serve those communities, how we can create opportunities for there to be grocery stores in food deserts, a very important part of the conversation. In Connecticut specifically, Food Rescue US, has 3 locations, one in Fairfield County, one in Northwest Connecticut, and one in the Hartford area. I think Haven's Harvest is also on this call. And in the beginning of Haven's Harvest, Food Rescue US further enabled their work by having them use our technology, and they have since grown up and moved on, but we're really proud of all the work that we were able to help them with in Connecticut. So in Hartford, we have 241 registered rescuers who pick up food from 15 food donors and deliver it to over 39 social service agencies. And in 1 month, they rescued and delivered the equivalent of 21,000 meals, which is just incredible when you really think about that amount of food. Fairfield County is our flagship location. This is where we were founded. We use it as our beta location for most of the work that we're doing. And in this location, since our inception in 2011, we've rescued over 31 million meals throughout our network of 2,100 volunteers, 200 agencies, and 300 food donors. So we're really, really proud of the impact of that work, again, in where we were founded. And in Northwest Connecticut, in what people would think is a sleepy little rural area in Connecticut, we've mobilized over 250 volunteers picking up food from 80 food donors and serving over 50 agencies. So very, very powerful impact that we're having in Connecticut. But we also have to look at the other influences that are happening to our network and to our food insecure population. We were talking about before the pandemic, during the pandemic. During the pandemic, there were a lot of social service programs put into play, such as the SNAP program, and that was expanded. Those benefits were expanded. So households that received SNAP benefits were receiving an additional $95 or more in monthly benefits. All of those programs are coming to an end, as well as those programs ending and grocery prices are rising. We've also seen that child tax credit is going away, and other programs like that have shown significant impact on benefits to health and nutrition. So we're really looking at what's going to happen. There's going to be a huge increase in the amount of need because these programs are ending. And Connecticut is looking at what ways they can help. Governor Lamont extended our state's free lunch program, and he's extended that to all students through the end of the academic year. And what they've really found is that by providing that food for all students in school, that specifically the food insecure are better served, because so many of them don't want to raise their hands and say, I'm food insecure, I have need. There's really a stigma attached to it. The additional work that's happening in Connecticut is there are conversations around food as medicine. So the opportunity for doctors, nutritionists to be prescribing healthy, fresh foods for people to be eating, for benefits to be extended, so that SNAP recipients can get double their value on their SNAP dollars to be able to buy produce and produce incentives at farmers markets to further extend people's ability to purchase food. And the other thing is conversations about requiring grocery stores to donate excess food. So food that would otherwise be wasted, having a requirement to donate that food, and specifically to food recovery organizations. So we're really looking forward to what's going to be of those conversations. Carol, anything to add to that?
I think that was really comprehensive. I think I just would reiterate that we're really worried. We're worried about, along with a lot of other people and probably all of you on this call, what's going to happen. You know, because we thought after the pandemic, the numbers were starting to trend down and would continue down, and there was a much greater awareness for not only food waste, but for food insecurity. And now with inflation, with the benefits ending, it's just putting a tremendous strain on the people who can least afford it. So it's a big concern. So our teams in Connecticut in particular are really deep into their communities. And, you know, we're looking to continue to increase what we do for the people who need it the most.
And I saw that there were a few additional chats. I want to make sure we can open up the floor. It looked like there was a question. I seem to be having a little bit of a problem where the general questions have disappeared. So did anyone want to just ask their question?
Hi, that was me deleting a message to you.
Oh, okay. All right. I thought I saw a sign that there was a chat coming up, and I thought, what's going on there? Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Great.
What is there anything new on the horizon technology wise? Anything that's sort of your next best in the app?
So specifically, yes, that's a great question. Specifically our app. Yeah. So yes, there's always great things on the horizon for us. And so right now we're looking at ways to improve our the reporting of the types of food that we're rescuing, as well as the amount of food that we're rescuing, and just getting smarter about the opportunities we have to distinguish between rescuing a bag of apples versus a bag of lettuce, and really getting better with that type of reporting. Also thinking about how do we optimize our routes, right? How do we make sure that, although in our minds we know that we're going the shortest distance, but how do we make sure that it's the most efficient route for our rescuers to be driving? Thinking about how we can better serve the needs of our social service agencies, how we can better understand what they need, help them understand better what they need, so we can better serve them with the right types of food that they need, the quantities of food they need, and when they need it.
So
Great.
I might just add to that. I think it's pretty obvious. We have so much data that comes through our app. And we just hired a new product manager, someone who will be, he's been on our team for about a month, and he's hit the deck running, which is awesome. And one of the areas, he's looking at all of our areas, but he's really looking at our reporting and our data, because we can learn so much. We have so much right at our fingertips, and we want to make sure that we're learning as much as we can about what's actually going on in each of our sites. So we're excited about that. And then, little things like we just, maybe not so little, just added badges for our rescuers, so that when they complete, this is from when we launched the 3rd generation, when they complete 10, they'll get a badge. Or if we have some rescuers, Melissa, trying to think of the record in Fairfield County. We've got one individual who's done 700 rescues since the 3rd generation, which is, I can't quite figure out how he does it. And then we have another individual woman who's done 10, hundreds and hundreds of rescues. So it's, so I think the data is key. We're excited.
I think that sounds very exciting. Maybe we can have you back as you learn more. I clearly the app is a way that people can get involved, but just to make sure that we cover off on this as we're getting to the end of our hour together, how can people get involved? If they, and I'll separate this across Connecticut because we are a statewide organization. If you live in one of the 3 areas, how can people get involved? If you don't live in one of the 3 areas, what do you recommend for people who really, care about this issue?
So the best thing to do for anybody, anywhere across the country is to visit our website, and that's foodrescue.us. And there you can learn more about the work that we're doing. You can see that if you're in one of our locations, it will link you directly to our app, and you can sign up to get involved and be part of the solution by becoming a volunteer. If you're in a community where we do not have a food rescue operation, certainly if you're interested, if you know community members that might be interested in starting a food rescue operation, we're always looking for new communities. We're always looking for new leaders. And then obviously we're always looking to expand our impact. The way that we do that is by raising money. So please don't, on our website, we have a donate button right there, and please help us.
Great, thank you. I'll open it up and thank you. It is, it is exciting to see so many opportunities for hands-on as a mom of a daughter in elementary school. It's also interesting to think about ways that families, that's what was sparking for me too, ways that families can really, get involved and see hands-on, that the issues, but also to be part of a solution, I think is really, really exciting. So,
and we have many families that do this work together. And to your point about seeing the issues, so many of the kids who go to school and they realize like, oh, I have a big lunch bag full of food and my friend does not, how does that happen? And to be able to explain that and to show that there is something that everybody in the community can be doing to help.
Well, Thank you. I'm pretty excited to hear about what's going on here in Connecticut. I'll put out a call for any last questions. And if not, we'll give ourselves 5 minutes between meetings, which I'm sure everyone will appreciate. And then we'll wrap up. All right. I'll say thank you again, and we'll stop the recording.
Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach back out to either Carol or I. And we look forward to hearing from you.